The heavy steel deadbolts of the penthouse door slid shut with a loud, final crack. Rachel jumped, her heart leaping into her throat. She spun around. Junwoo was standing by the main entrance, his large hand completely covering the security panel on the wall. The small green light above the panel blinked once and turned solid red. The entire penthouse was now on total lockdown. No one could get in and the elevators were shut off. No one could get out. Junwoo slowly turned to face her. The dark, relaxed husband from the car ride home was completely gone. In his place was a terrifying, cold predator. He walked toward the glass coffee table and threw a thick manila folder right onto the center of it. The papers inside spilled out, covering the glass. "You lied to me," he said. His voice was not loud. It was deadly quiet, which made it 10 times worse. Rachel swallowed hard, her mouth suddenly completely dry. "I don't know what you are talking about." Junwoo did not stop walking. He closed the distance between them in 3 long strides. Rachel backed up instinctively until her spine hit the cold, floor-to-ceiling glass window. She was trapped. He stepped right into her personal space, his broad chest almost touching hers. He placed one hand flat against the glass right next to her head, caging her in. "Jin just finished the deep background check on your uncle," Junwoo said, his dark eyes boring into hers. He pulled Marcus's phone records. He pulled his computer searches. Marcus did not hire the mechanic 2 weeks ago. Marcus did not even know the New York flight existed 2 weeks ago. "I did not put that flight on the official schedule until 3 days ago, Rachel. So tell me, how exactly did you overhear a murder plot that had not even been planned yet?" Rachel felt the blood drain completely out of her face. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her mind scrambled frantically for an excuse, a lie, anything to throw him off the scent. But Jin was too good. The records were undeniable. She had slipped up on the timeline because she was remembering the events from her past life, a timeline that had already happened to her before she woke up in this arranged marriage. "Answer me," Junwoo demanded, his voice dropping to a rough growl. His other hand came up, his thick fingers wrapping gently but firmly around her jaw, forcing her to look right up into his furious eyes. "Who the fuck are you really working for? Do you have another rat inside my company? Are you playing me to get a better payout?" Before we get back into this intense lockdown, please leave a like on this video if you are completely hooked, because it really helps the algorithm push more wild stories like this to you. I have to know what you guys are thinking right now. Do you think Rachel should finally confess her crazy secret about knowing the future, or should she keep lying to protect herself? Also, have you ever been caught in a massive lie that you could not talk your way out of? Let me know down in the comments, and tell me how you handled it. If you are loving the gritty drama and the dark romance, make sure to hit that subscribe button to join our growing channel. Rachel gripped the front of his dark suit jacket. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold on to the expensive fabric. "I am not playing you," she whispered desperately. "I swear to you, Junwoo, I am on your side. I want my uncle destroyed. You have to believe me." "Then tell me the truth," he fired back, his thumb pressing lightly against her cheekbone. He was so close she could feel the heat radiating off his body. His anger was completely suffocating. "How did you know the exact date? How did you know about the mechanic before Marcus even made the phone call?" I guessed," she stammered, hating how pathetic it sounded. "I knew he wanted you dead, and I knew he was looking for a way. I saw the travel schedule on your desk and I just put the pieces together to make you believe me." Junwoo stared at her. His eyes searched every single inch of her face. He was an expert at reading people. He had spent 15 years watching people lie to him while pretending to be mute. He knew what a lie looked like, and he knew she was full of shit. A dark, ugly sneer pulled at the corner of his mouth. He let go of her jaw and took a half step back, his face turning completely blank and cold. "You are a very smart woman, Rachel," he said softly, shaking his head. "But you think I am a fool. If you will not tell me the truth, then we do not have a partnership. We just have a hostage situation." He turned his back on her and started walking toward his office. Rachel felt a massive spike of panic hit her chest. If she lost his trust right now, she would lose his protection. She would be completely alone against her family. She opened her mouth to yell after him, ready to confess the entire insane truth about living this timeline twice. Suddenly, the heavy phone on the kitchen counter started ringing loudly. Junwoo stopped walking. He stared at the phone. It was his private secure line. Only one person ever called that number. He walked over and picked up the receiver. "What is it, Jin?" Junwoo asked, his voice completely flat. Rachel watched as his broad shoulders slowly went entirely stiff. He stood there listening for a long minute. When he finally hung up the phone, the anger from the interrogation was completely gone. It was replaced by a chilling, absolute focus. "Get your shoes on," Junwoo ordered, turning to look at her. "The lockdown is over. We have to leave right now." "What happened?" Rachel asked, quickly grabbing her black heels from the floor. "Your uncle did exactly what he promised," Junwoo said, grabbing his suit jacket from the chair. "He took the fake medical records you gave him and leaked them directly to the press an hour ago. The news is everywhere. The stock price is already crashing. My stepmother just called an emergency meeting of the board of directors. She wants to hold a vote right now to strip me of my company." The heavy Seattle rain slammed against the massive glass windows of the CO Group headquarters building. The boardroom was on the 50th floor, overlooking the dark, wet city. The room was freezing cold, filled with 20 men and women in expensive grey and black suits. They were all staring at the huge flat screen on the wall, which was projecting the fake brain scans and the forged signature of Dr. Park. Junwoo was sitting in a leather chair at the end of the long mahogany table. He was slouched down, his head tilted slightly to the side, staring blankly at a water glass in front of him. His hands rested limply on his lap. He was completely locked back into his broken character. He looked pathetic and empty. Rachel stood right behind his chair, her hands gripping the thick leather of the backrest. She was the only person standing in the room. Madame Seo sat at the opposite end of the table, her cold blue eyes fixed right on Rachel. Taejin sat next to her, a nasty, victorious smirk glued to his face. "The evidence is completely clear," Madame Seo announced to the room. Her voice was loud and entirely confident. "My stepson has suffered a total mental collapse. His private doctor has finally admitted that there is zero brain activity. For the safety of this company and our shareholders, we must immediately remove Seo Junwoo from the position of Chief Executive Officer. I motion to hold the vote right now." A murmur of agreement went around the massive table. Men in suits started nodding their heads. They were greedy, and they wanted the weak king off the throne so they could carve up his money. Rachel felt Junwoo's heavy leather shoe slide under the table and press firmly against her ankle. It was a silent, hidden touch. It was his way of telling her to fight. "You are not voting on anything today," Rachel said. Her voice cut through the large room like a sharp knife. The entire room went completely silent. Everyone turned to look at the young woman in the simple black dress. Taejin let out a loud, mocking laugh. "Sit down and shut up, little girl," Taejin sneered. "This is a corporate board meeting. You do not have a seat at this table. You are just the nurse we bought to wipe his chin." Rachel did not sit down. She let go of the chair and walked slowly around to the side of the table. She kept her chin high and her shoulders back. She stared directly at Taejin, making sure he saw the absolute fire in her eyes. "I am not a nurse," Rachel said coldly. "I am his legal wife, and under Section 4 of your own corporate bylaws, a CEO cannot be removed for medical reasons without a mandatory 30-day review period by an independent medical board chosen by his legal spouse. Not a leaked piece of paper, a full hospital review." Madame Seo's face flushed a dark, angry red. Those bylaws were written 30 years ago. In an emergency situation where the stock is dropping, the board has the right to bypass the review. "Go ahead and bypass it," Rachel challenged, slamming both of her hands flat onto the polished wood table. She leaned forward, staring right down the length of the table at the old woman. "Hold your illegal vote. The second you do, I will walk right downstairs to the 50 reporters standing in the lobby. I will tell them that this board is stealing a multi-billion-dollar company from a disabled man using illegal loopholes. I will file a massive lawsuit tomorrow morning that will drag this entire company into federal court for years. How far do you think your stock price will drop when the FBI starts looking at your accounting books?" The men at the table started shifting nervously in their expensive chairs. The heavy-set finance director, Mr. Song, was sweating bullets, refusing to look anywhere near Rachel or Junwoo. He knew exactly what kind of trouble he was already in. Madame Seo gripped her expensive gold pen so hard her knuckles turned white. She hated Rachel. She hated that a poor girl from a trashy family was completely holding up her master plan. But Madame Seo was also smart. She knew a massive public lawsuit would completely ruin the company's reputation. "Fine," Madame Seo spit out, her voice dripping with venom. "You want 30 days, you stupid girl. You have 30 days. but the second the medical board proves he is a vegetable, you will be thrown out onto the street with absolutely nothing. Meeting adjourned. The board members stood up quickly, grabbing their briefcases and rushing out of the room. They did not want to be in the middle of a family war. T-Jin shot Rachel one last filthy look before following his mother out the heavy glass doors. When the room was finally empty, Rachel let out a long, shaky breath. Her legs felt weak. She walked back over to Junwoo and put her hand on his shoulder. He instantly sat up straight, the dead look vanishing from his eyes. He reached up and covered her hand with his. "You held the line," he murmured softly. "You just bought us the 3 months we need. Once the plane trap is set, none of this will matter." "Let's just go home," Rachel said tiredly. "I hate this building." They took the private elevator down to the underground parking garage. Jin was waiting with the black Maybach, the engine already running quietly. Rachel climbed into the back seat, completely exhausted. Junwoo slid in next to her, pulling the heavy door shut. The car started moving toward the dark exit tunnel. Rachel rested her head against the cold window. She survived the lockdown interrogation, and she survived the board meeting. She just wanted to sleep for 2 days straight. Suddenly, her cell phone started vibrating wildly in her purse. She pulled it out and looked at the screen. It was an unknown number. Thinking it might be a reporter who got her personal cell, she almost hit ignore, but something in her gut told her to answer it. She swiped the green button and lifted the phone to her ear. "Hello," she said quietly. "Rachel Seo," a rough, deep voice said on the other end. The man was speaking Korean with a very thick, dirty street accent. It was not her uncle. It was not anyone from the company. "Who is this?" Rachel asked, sitting up straight. "Your Uncle Marcus is a very impatient man," the rough voice chuckled softly. "He did not like hearing about your little stunt in the boardroom today. He thinks the 3-month plan is taking too long, so he hired us to speed things up." Rachel's blood turned completely to ice. "What are you talking about? Who are you?" "Check your text messages, little bird," the man said. Rachel pulled the phone away from her ear and looked at her screen. A new picture message had just come through from the same number. She opened the photo with a shaking thumb. She stopped breathing. It was a picture of her mother. She was sitting in a cheap wooden chair in the middle of a dirty concrete room. Her hands were tied tightly behind her back with thick plastic zip ties. She had a dark, nasty bruise on her left cheek, and she looked completely terrified. "Mom," Rachel gasped out loud, dropping the phone onto her lap. The device bounced onto the leather seat. Junwoo saw the picture instantly. He grabbed the phone off the seat and brought it up to his ear. "If you want the old woman to live to see tomorrow morning," the rough voice continued through the speaker, loud enough for Rachel to hear in the quiet car, "you will bring your husband's voting shares to the docks at midnight tonight. Just sign his name. If you call the cops or if you tell anyone, we will cut her throat and leave her in a dumpster. We are the K-Kangpi. We do not make empty threats." The line went completely dead. Rachel sat frozen in the dark car. Her entire world was collapsing perfectly around her. The K-Kangpi were the actual Korean Mafia. They were ruthless killers who did dirty work for rich men. Marcus had totally snapped. He completely bypassed the plane crash plan and went straight for the nuclear option. Junwoo barked to the front of the car. His voice was no longer quiet. It was an absolute roar of violence. "Lock the doors. Do not stop this car for anything." Junwoo turned to Rachel. His dark eyes were burning with a fire she had never seen before. He reached inside his jacket and pulled out his heavy black gun, resting it on his knee. The silence in the car was completely suffocating. They were entirely out of time. If Rachel signed the papers, Junwoo lost the company and Marcus won. If they ignored the threat, her mother died tonight. The only other option was to unleash the real, violent Seo Junwoo to hunt the K-Kangpi down. But if he did that, he would expose his secret to the entire city. He would trigger a massive underworld war entirely too early, ruining the trap he had spent 15 years building. Junwoo racked the slide of the gun with a loud, sharp crack. He looked right at her, waiting for her to make the call. The sharp, metallic crack of the gun echoing in the dark car made Rachel flinch. She stared at the black weapon resting on Junwoo's knee, and then she looked up at his face. The blank, empty mask he had worn for 15 years was entirely gone. The man sitting next to her was a total stranger. He looked like an absolute killer. His jaw was locked tight, his chest rising and falling with slow, calculated breaths. "Junwoo, you can't," Rachel whispered, her voice shaking violently. If you show up at the docks with a gun, the secret is completely out. The Kangpi will tell Marcus. Marcus will tell the board of directors. Your 15-year plan will be entirely ruined. You will lose the trap for the plane crash. Fuck the plane trap, Junwoo growled, his voice so deep it vibrated right through the leather seat. He did not even look at her. He kept his eyes fixed on the dark street ahead. Jin, step on the damn gas, call the shadow unit. Tell them to meet us at Pier 44 in 20 minutes. Full tactical gear. No police. Yes, boss, Jin said. The massive car surged forward, the engine roaring loudly as Jin ran a red light, speeding through the wet, dark streets of Seattle. Jin picked up a radio from the dashboard and started speaking rapid, harsh Korean into it. Rachel grabbed Junwoo's thick arm. She dug her fingers into his suit jacket. You are throwing away your entire company for me. You survived in that hell for over a decade just to get your revenge. If you do this, they will take everything from you. Junwoo slowly turned his head. His dark eyes locked onto hers. The absolute intensity in his stare made her stomach drop. He reached over and grabbed her hand, peeling it off his arm, only to weave his thick fingers entirely through hers. His grip was tight, almost painful. They took a picture of your mother tied to a chair, Junwoo said, his voice dropping to a terrifying, deadly calm. They threatened to cut the throat of the woman who gave birth to my wife. Do you really think I care about a corporate board meeting right now? But Marcus made a massive mistake, Junwoo interrupted, squeezing her hand hard enough to make her stop talking. He thought he could use street dogs to scare a broken man. I am going to show those dogs exactly why I let them live in my city. I am going to show them who actually owns the dark. He pulled her hand up and pressed his warm lips against her knuckles. It was a completely crazy gesture right in the middle of a death threat, but it sent a hot, heavy shiver straight down Rachel's spine. You do not need to worry about my company, Rachel. You just need to follow my orders tonight. Can you do that? Rachel swallowed the giant lump in her throat. She nodded once. Tell me what to do. You are going to walk into that warehouse alone, Junwoo said, his eyes never leaving hers. You are going to hold a fake folder of papers. You will keep them talking for exactly 30 seconds. You need to make sure you see exactly where your mother is sitting. The second you hear glass break, you drop straight to the floor and you cover your head. Do not look up. Do not scream. Just stay flat on the concrete. What are you going to do? She asked, her heart hammering against her ribs. I am going to kill every single man in that room who is not standing next to your mother, Junwoo stated completely flatly. He let go of her hand and picked up his gun, checking the magazine in the dark. The rest of the drive was entirely silent. The heavy Seattle storm beat against the roof of the Maybach. The city lights slowly faded away, replaced by the ugly, rusted shipping containers and massive cranes of the industrial docks. The smell of dead fish, salt water, and spilled oil leaked into the car. It was a completely isolated, dead part of the city. Jin killed the headlights as they rolled past a massive chain-link fence. He parked the car in the deep shadow of a brick warehouse, completely out of sight. The shadow unit is already in position, boss, Jin said quietly over his shoulder. They have the exits blocked, 4 targets inside. The old woman is in the center. Junwoo opened his door. The freezing rain blew into the car instantly. He stepped out and reached his hand back inside for Rachel. She took a deep breath, grabbed her purse and slid out into the storm. Her thin black dress was immediately soaked. The cold wind bit right through her skin, making her teeth chatter. Junwoo reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick, folded stack of blank papers. He shoved them into her cold hands. 30 seconds, he murmured, leaning down so his mouth was right next to her ear. The heat of his breath was the only warm thing in the freezing night. You are my wife. Walk in there like you own the damn building. I am right behind you. He completely melted back into the dark shadows. 1 second he was standing next to her, and the next he was just gone. Jin was gone too. Rachel was entirely alone in the freezing rain. She tightened her grip on the fake papers. She forced her shaking legs to move forward. The gravel crunched loudly under her high heels as she walked toward the giant, rusted metal door of Warehouse 44. The door was pulled slightly open, spilling a dim, sickly yellow light out into the muddy lot. Rachel walked right through the opening. The inside of the warehouse was massive, empty, and smelled like old blood and wet concrete. In the direct center of the huge room, sitting under a single hanging light bulb, was her mother. Mom, Rachel yelled, her voice echoing loudly against the tin roof. Her mother jerked her head up. Her grey hair was a mess and the dark bruise on her cheek looked even worse in person. She had a thick strip of silver duct tape right over her mouth and her hands were heavily tied behind the wooden chair. When she saw Rachel, her eyes widened in pure, frantic panic. She started shaking her head violently, trying to scream through the tape. She wanted Rachel to run. "Well, look at this," a nasty, rough voice called out from the darkness to the right. Rachel stopped moving. She stood perfectly still, exactly 20 feet away from her mother. 4 men slowly walked out of the shadows. They were all wearing cheap black leather jackets. They looked dirty, hard, and entirely dangerous. They were Kangpi, street thugs who killed for cash. The man in the front had a thick, ugly scar running completely across his nose. He was holding a large silver handgun, pointing it loosely at the floor. "You actually came alone," the scarred man laughed, spitting a thick wad of spit onto the concrete floor. "Marcus told us you were a stupid little girl. I guess he was right. Where is the mute freak? Did you leave him drooling in his bed?" Rachel felt the hot spike of anger hit her chest. It was the exact same anger she felt when Tae-jin insulted Junwoo in the boardroom. She refused to act scared. She remembered Junwoo's words, "Walk in there like you own the building." "My husband is exactly where he needs to be," Rachel said, her voice ringing out clear and completely cold. She held up the stack of folded papers. "I brought the shares. You let my mother go right now and I will hand them over." The scarred man laughed again. It was an ugly, scraping sound. He waved his silver gun toward her. "That is not how this works, little bird. You bring the papers to me. I make sure the signatures are real. Then maybe I decide not to cut the old woman's throat just for the fun of it." "No," Rachel said firmly. She did not take a single step forward. She started counting in her head. 10 seconds had passed. "I am not moving. You cut those plastic ties off her wrists right now, or I will tear these papers to pieces." The 3 men standing behind the leader pulled out their own weapons. Long, heavy knives caught the yellow light. The atmosphere in the warehouse instantly shifted from a threat to actual, deadly violence. "You think you have a choice?" the leader growled, taking a heavy step toward Rachel. He raised his silver gun, aiming it directly at her chest. "You are going to walk over here right now, bitch, or I will put a bullet right in your kneecap and drag you over here myself." 20 seconds. Rachel stared right down the dark barrel of the gun. Her heart was beating so fast it felt like it was going to explode through her ribs. She forced herself to stand completely still. She locked eyes with the scarred man. "You are making a huge mistake," Rachel whispered loudly. "I don't make mistakes," the man sneered, placing his dirty finger right on the trigger. 30 seconds. The massive glass skylight, high above the warehouse floor, exploded. A shower of sharp, broken glass rained down like absolute thunder. Rachel did not hesitate. The exact second she heard the noise, she dropped straight to the cold concrete floor. She curled into a tight ball, throwing her hands over the back of her head, and squeezed her eyes completely shut. The entire warehouse erupted into total chaos. Loud, deafening gunshots ripped through the air. It wasn't the sound of a random street fight. It was fast, controlled, and perfectly placed. Pop, pop, pop. Rachel heard the heavy thud of bodies hitting the concrete. She heard a man scream in pure, sudden agony. The smell of gunpowder instantly filled the damp air, thick and burning her nose. She kept her face pressed hard against the dirty floor. She did not look up. She trusted Junwoo entirely. The shooting stopped after exactly 5 seconds. The silence that followed was heavy and completely terrifying. "Clear," a deep voice shouted from the shadows. "Clear," another voice echoed from the other side of the room. Rachel felt a massive, heavy hand grab her upper arm. She flinched hard, letting out a small gasp. "It's me," Junwoo's rough voice sounded right above her. "Get up, you are safe." Rachel opened her eyes and let him pull her up to her feet. Her knees were completely weak, shaking so badly she almost fell back down. Junwoo wrapped his thick arm around her waist, holding her completely tight against his side. She looked around the room. 3 of the Kangpi men were lying completely dead on the bloody concrete. They had all been shot directly in the chest and the head. The violence was absolute. 6 men dressed in completely black tactical gear, wearing black masks over their faces, were spreading out across the room. Jin was standing right behind her mother's chair, holding a knife. He quickly sliced through the thick plastic zip ties and gently pulled the silver tape off the older woman's mouth. Rachel's mother started crying instantly. "Rachel, oh my God, Rachel." Rachel broke away from Junwoo and ran to her mother. She threw her arms around the older woman, hugging her so hard it hurt. "I've got you, Mom. You are okay. I'm right here." "I was so scared," her mother sobbed into Rachel's wet shoulder. "Those terrible men, they just broke into my room at the facility. They dragged me out into a van. I didn't know what was happening." I know," Rachel whispered, rubbing her mother's back. "It's over now." A loud, wet coughing sound broke the emotional moment. Rachel turned her head. The scarred leader of the kidnapping was not dead. He was lying on his back near the edge of the yellow light. His silver gun was kicked far away across the floor. Both of his kneecaps were completely blown out, shattered by bullets. Blood was pooling quickly around his legs on the concrete. He was gasping for air, staring up at the roof in total shock. Junwoo walked slowly across the warehouse floor. The sound of his expensive leather shoes hitting the concrete was the only noise in the room. He completely ignored the dead bodies. He walked right up to the bleeding leader and stopped. Junwoo looked down at the man. He raised his right hand, keeping his black gun pointed straight down at the man's head. The kidnapping leader slowly rolled his head to the side. He looked up at the massive man standing over him. His eyes widened in absolute, complete confusion. "You," the bleeding man choked out, spitting blood onto his own chin. "You are the freak. You are the CO kid. You are supposed to be a vegetable." Junwoo let out a slow, dark laugh. The sound was so cold it made the hair on Rachel's arms stand straight up. "A vegetable," Junwoo repeated softly. He reached down, grabbed the man by the collar of his cheap leather jacket, and violently dragged him up until the man was sitting up, screaming in pain from his shattered legs. Junwoo leaned his face in close. "Look right at me, street dog. Do I look like a vegetable to you?" The scarred man shook his head, his eyes completely wide with raw terror. He realized exactly who he was dealing with. He wasn't dealing with a weak CEO. He was dealing with a completely awake, highly trained monster. "You made a mistake tonight," Junwoo said smoothly, his voice echoing in the large room. "You put your dirty hands on my wife's family. I do not let people touch what belongs to me." "Marcus hired us," the man screamed, crying from the pain in his legs. "He paid us 100 grand, it was just a job. Please man, it was just a job." "I know," Junwoo said flatly. "And now I am giving you a job. I am leaving you alive for one reason. I am going to let my medics wrap your legs so you do not bleed to death. And then you are going to pick up a phone. You are going to call your boss. You are going to tell the head of the kidnapping that CEO Junwoo is completely awake. You will tell him that the Broken King is back, and if any of his men ever step foot near my wife again, I will burn his entire syndicate to the ground. Do you understand?" The bleeding man nodded frantically. Yes, I swear to God." Junwoo dropped him completely. The man's head hit the concrete with a loud thud. Junwoo turned his back on him without a second look. He walked back over to where Rachel was holding her mother. The dark, violent fire in his eyes was still burning, but when he looked at Rachel, the hard lines of his face softened just a tiny bit. He reached out and gently touched her mother's shoulder. "Mrs. CEO," Junwoo said quietly, using an entirely respectful tone. He bowed his head slightly. "I am sorry you had to see this, but I promise you no one will ever pull you out of your bed again. You are coming home with us tonight." Rachel's mother stared at him, her mouth slightly open. She looked at the giant man, then looked at the dead bodies on the floor, and then looked at Rachel. She was completely in shock. He can speak." "It's a very long story, Mom," Rachel said tiredly, helping her mother stand up from the wooden chair. Junwoo looked at Jin. "Get the cleanup crew in here. Wipe the security cameras for the entire block. Put the old woman in the second car with a full security detail. Rachel rides with me." "Yes, sir," Jin nodded quickly. He gently took Rachel's mother by the arm, guiding her out of the warehouse toward a second black SUV that had pulled up outside. Rachel stood alone in the middle of the room with Junwoo. The adrenaline was starting to crash out of her system. She felt entirely cold and incredibly weak. She looked at her husband. He had just thrown away 15 years of total secrecy in exactly 5 minutes. The entire city was about to know the truth. "You did it," Rachel whispered, staring up at his chest. "You exposed yourself. Your stepmother will find out by morning. The board will know." Junwoo reached out and grabbed both of her arms. He pulled her flush against his chest, wrapping his massive arms entirely around her small body. He buried his face right into the crook of her neck. He smelled like gunpowder, rain, and dark cologne. "Let them know," he murmured roughly against her skin. "I was getting really fucking tired of sitting quietly in the corner anyway." The drive back to the city was completely silent. The heavy black car cut through the dark, freezing rain. Rachel leaned her head against the cold leather seat, her entire body shaking from the violent adrenaline drop. She could still smell the thick, ugly scent of gunpowder and copper blood clinging to Junwoo's suit. He sat right next to her in the dark, his massive frame completely still. He had his phone pressed to his ear, listening to his security team report from the other cars. He did not speak a single word, but the dangerous, wide-awake energy rolling off him filled the entire Maybach. He was out of the cage. The 15 years of playing the silent, broken fool were completely over, and the man sitting next to her was ready to tear the city apart. When they finally reached the underground parking garage of their building, the place was crawling with men in black suits. Jin had completely locked down the entire tower. They walked into the private elevator, the heavy steel doors sliding shut to block out the noise of the guards. The penthouse felt totally different when the doors opened. It was no longer a quiet, empty trap. It was a war room. 2 of Jin's top men were standing by the front door holding heavy black rifles. Rachel's mother was brought up a few minutes later in the second elevator. She looked incredibly small and fragile, clutching a thick grey blanket around her shoulders. Her face was pale, and the dark purple bruise on her cheek looked terrible under the bright lights of the hallway. Junwoo's private doctor was already waiting in the living room. He was an older man with a calm face, carrying a black medical bag. He did not look surprised to see Junwoo standing perfectly straight and giving orders. "Take her to the east guest room," Junwoo told the doctor, his voice smooth and entirely in control. "Check her head for a concussion. Give her something to help her sleep. I want 2 guards stationed outside her bedroom door until I say otherwise." "Yes, Mr. CEO," the doctor nodded quickly. He gently guided Rachel's mother down the long hallway. Rachel followed them into the massive guest room. She sat on the edge of the large bed while the doctor checked her mother's blood pressure and cleaned the nasty cut on her face. Her mother kept looking at the door, completely terrified that the Kangpi men were going to walk right through it. "They are dead, Mom," Rachel whispered, holding her mother's shaking hand. "They can't hurt you anymore. You are safe here." "That man," her mother mumbled, her eyes heavy from the sedative the doctor had just given her. "Your husband. He killed them, Rachel. He shot them without even blinking. What kind of monster did your uncle force you to marry?" Rachel swallowed a huge lump in her throat. She gently brushed the grey hair away from her mother's sweating forehead. "The kind of monster who protects us," she said softly. "Go to sleep. I will be right down the hall." She sat in the quiet room for another 20 minutes until her mother's breathing finally leveled out into a deep, heavy sleep. Rachel stood up, her joints aching and her feet completely covered in blisters from the wet high heels. She walked out of the guest room and pulled the heavy oak door shut. 2 large men in black suits immediately stepped in front of the door, crossing their arms. They nodded to her, their faces blank. Rachel walked slowly down the long hallway toward Junwoo's private office. The lights were blazing inside. The heavy curtains were completely shut. She walked through the open doorway. Junwoo had taken off his dark suit jacket and his shoulder holster. They were thrown carelessly onto a leather couch. He was standing behind his massive desk, leaning his hands flat on the glass top, staring at the 4 glowing computer monitors. His white dress shirt was unbuttoned at the top, and a small smudge of dried blood stained the edge of his left cuff. He looked up the exact second she stepped into the room. His dark eyes locked onto hers, sharp and completely focused. The softness he had shown her in the warehouse was entirely gone. "Is she asleep?" he asked, his deep voice carrying easily across the room. "Yes," Rachel said, wrapping her arms around her own stomach. She felt incredibly cold. "The doctor said the bruise will heal. She is just in shock." "Good," Junwoo said flatly. He pushed himself off the desk and walked slowly around it, stepping into the center of the room. He pointed a long finger at the heavy leather chair sitting in front of his desk. "Sit down, Rachel. Lock the door behind you." Rachel's heart instantly started beating faster. She reached behind her and turned the heavy brass lock on the office door. It clicked loudly in the quiet room. She walked over to the leather chair and sat down. She was exhausted, but the absolute intensity rolling off her husband kept her wide awake. Junwoo walked over to a crystal decanter sitting on a side table. He poured 2 fingers of dark brown whiskey into a glass and walked back to her. He handed her the glass. "Drink," he ordered softly. "You are still shaking." She took the glass and swallowed a large mouthful. The alcohol burned going down, but it spread a fast, heavy warmth right into her chest. She kept her hands wrapped tightly around the cool crystal. I broke my cover tonight to save your mother, Junwoo said, standing completely still in front of her. He looked down at her with a heavy, calculating stare. By tomorrow morning my stepmother will know I am awake, Jin will know, the board of directors will panic, they will try to lock me out of the company bank accounts before lunch. We are in an open, bloody war now. I know, Rachel whispered, looking down at her lap. I am sorry, I ruined your 15-year plan. I ruined the trap at the hangar. I do not care about the damn hangar, Junwoo snapped, his voice rough and hard. I care about the fact that you are still lying to me in my own house. Rachel snapped her head up. He had not forgotten. Even with dead bodies on the floor and a massive corporate war starting tomorrow, his brain was completely fixed on the impossible flaw Jin had found in her story. Junwoo leaned down, resting both of his massive hands on the arms of her chair. He trapped her exactly like he had against the window earlier. His face was inches from hers. Marcus did not know about the New York flight 2 weeks ago, Junwoo said slowly, sounding out every single word. Marcus did not hire the mechanic, so tell me right now before I decide you are too dangerous to trust. How did you know my plane was going to crash? Rachel stared into his dark, furious eyes. There was no way out. She could not lie to him again. He would see right through it, and if he threw her out now, Marcus would absolutely kill her. Because I watched it happen, Rachel breathed, her voice shaking so badly she could barely speak. I watched it burn on the news. Junwoo frowned. A hard, tight line formed between his dark eyebrows. What the fuck are you talking about? The flight has not happened yet. It happened to me, she said, tears finally spilling over her eyelashes. She didn't wipe them away. She just gripped the whiskey glass harder. I lived this already, Junwoo. I lived this entire nightmare once before. He did not move. He did not call her crazy. He just stared at her, his eyes searching her face for any sign that she was having a mental breakdown. Keep talking, he demanded, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. In my last life I married you today just like this, Rachel cried, the memories flooding back into her brain like a dark poison. I wore the same dress, I was completely terrified of you. I really thought you were a broken, mute vegetable. I spent 3 months hiding in this penthouse, crying every single day. And exactly 3 months from now you got on that private jet to New York. The mechanic cut the hydraulic lines. The plane crashed into the mountains. You died. Junwoo's jaw clenched so hard a thick muscle ticked on the side of his face. He still did not back away. And then what happened? Marcus took everything, Rachel said, letting out a wet, ugly sob. He used the fake medical records and your death to steal your voting shares. He bought out the board of directors. He became a billionaire. And the exact second he got the money, he unplugged my mother's life support machines at the care facility. She died gasping for air alone in a cheap bed. He threw me out onto the street with absolutely nothing. I froze to death in an alley 2 years later, completely alone. And then I woke up. She looked right into his eyes, begging him to understand. I woke up yesterday morning in my bedroom at my uncle's house, right before they forced me into the wedding dress. I came back. I knew exactly what was going to happen, and I swore to myself I was going to stop it. I was going to use you to kill my uncle, and I was going to save your life so you wouldn't get on that plane. The office was so quiet Rachel could hear the heavy rain beating against the thick glass windows. She waited for him to laugh. She waited for him to pull away in complete disgust and tell her she belonged in an insane asylum. Instead, Junwoo slowly stood up to his full height. He ran one large hand through his dark hair. He turned around and walked over to the glass window, looking out over the wet city. He stood there for a long, silent minute. Rachel held her breath. She had handed him the craziest secret in the world. You knew Song was the rat in the dining room, Junwoo said quietly to the window. Yes, Rachel whispered. He was the one who helped Marcus forge the bank transfers after you died. You knew the exact date of the board meeting where my stepmother tried to remove me. Yes, it happened the exact same way. Junwoo slowly turned around. He looked at her. He didn't look creeped out. He didn't look like he thought she was crazy. He looked completely, violently alive. A slow, dark smile spread across his face. It was the smile of a completely ruthless predator who had just been handed the ultimate weapon. He walked back across the room and stopped right in front of her chair. He reached out and gently took the heavy crystal glass out of her shaking hands, setting it on the desk. He leaned down and grabbed her by the waist, pulling her up out of the chair until she was standing flush against his chest. You know the future, Junwoo murmured, his hands sliding firmly down her back. I know what happens in the next 3 months, she corrected him, her heart hammering against his solid chest. But things are already changing. I changed things by telling you. You changed things by talking to me. The Kangpi attack tonight. That didn't happen in my first life. Marcus is changing his plans because we pushed him too hard in the boardroom. Good, Junwoo growled, wrapping his arms completely around her. He buried his face in her dark hair, breathing in her scent. Let him change his plans. Let him panic, because he has absolutely no idea what is coming for him now. He pulled his head back and looked right into her eyes. The possessive fire in his dark stare was entirely overwhelming. He believed her. He completely accepted her insane story without a single doubt, simply because it gave them the power to destroy their enemies. You died in the cold, Junwoo whispered, his voice incredibly rough. He reached up and traced the line of her jaw with his thumb. Your family threw you away like actual garbage while they spent my money. Yes, she said softly. That is never going to happen again, he promised, his tone carrying a deadly, absolute weight. Marcus wants to play street games. I am going to show him what a real massacre looks like. Tomorrow morning we are going to walk right through the front doors of the CO Group headquarters. I am going to sit in my chair at the head of the table, entirely awake. And you are going to sit right next to me. Rachel felt a hot thrill shoot through her tired body. They will try to fight us. Tae-jin will try to lock you out. Let them try, Junwoo sneered, his grip tightening on her waist. I have 15 years of blackmail locked in my servers. I have the entire underworld terrified of me. And I have a wife who knows exactly where they are going to hide. He leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't a gentle, polite kiss. It was hard, entirely dominant and completely possessive. He kissed her like he was branding her, sealing their violent alliance in blood and secrets. Rachel gasped, her hands flying up to grip his broad shoulders. She didn't push him away. She pulled him closer, kissing him back with all the dark, desperate energy she had been holding inside for 2 lifetimes. When he finally pulled away, they were both breathing heavily. His dark eyes were black with intense heat. Go to sleep, Rachel, he ordered softly, his thumb rubbing across her swollen bottom lip. Rest, because tomorrow we burn their entire world down to the fucking ground. The sun did not shine in Seattle the next morning. The sky just turned a lighter, uglier shade of grey. Inside his massive, gaudy mansion, Marcus paced a hole right into his expensive living room rug. He held his cell phone tightly in his sweating hand. He had not slept a single minute. The Kangpi leader was supposed to call him at 1 o'clock in the morning to confirm that the old woman was dead and the shares were signed. It was now 7 o'clock in the morning. Marcus chewed violently on the end of an unlit cigar. He was completely terrified. Street killers did not just forget to call. Something had gone wrong. Maybe Rachel actually called the police. If the cops arrested the Kangpi men, they would give up Marcus's name in a heartbeat to save themselves. The cell phone in his hand suddenly started to vibrate. The screen flashed with a blocked number. Marcus let out a loud breath and quickly answered it. Hello, did you get the papers? Is it done? You are a very stupid, very dead pig, a low, scraping voice said on the other end of the line. Marcus froze. It was not the scarred leader he had hired. The voice was older, heavily accented, and carried a weight of absolute power. Who is this? Marcus demanded, trying to sound tough. Put the man I hired on the phone. The man you hired is currently bleeding in one of my underground clinics with both of his kneecaps completely shattered, the older man stated flatly. I am the head of the syndicate, and I am calling to tell you that you are entirely on your own. What? Marcus yelled, ash from his cigar falling onto his shirt. What the hell happened? Was it the cops? It was not the cops, the syndicate boss growled. You told my men that the CEO was a vegetable. You told them he was a broken, empty shell. You lied to us, Marcus. CEO Junwoo walked into that warehouse and shot 4 of my best men in the head before they could even blink. He is completely awake and he is a total monster. He told me to stay out of his way and I am listening to him. The Kangpi will no longer take your money. If you ever call us again, I will send men to cut your tongue out. The line went completely dead. Marcus stood perfectly still in the middle of his living room. The cell phone slipped out of his sweaty hand and hit the floor with a loud crack. He could not breathe. His chest felt completely tight. CEO Junwoo was awake. It was impossible. The medical records said his brain was fried. The nurses said he never moved. But the syndicate boss had no reason to lie. If Junwoo was awake, then he knew everything. He knew about the K-Kangpi, and he definitely knew about the fake medical papers. "Dad," Chloe's annoying voice called out from the hallway. She walked into the living room wearing her pink robe, holding a cup of coffee. "Why are you yelling? You are going to wake up the maids." Marcus did not look at her. His fat hands started to shake uncontrollably. He had to act right now. He had one single card left to play. If Junwoo was awake, he would absolutely come for Marcus. The only way to survive was to strip Junwoo of his money and his power before he could use it. "Get my coat," Marcus barked at his daughter, his voice cracking with pure panic. "I have to get to the CEO Group headquarters right now. I have to make sure the board of directors votes him out this morning." Miles away, high up in the cold glass tower, Rachel opened her eyes. The bedroom was warm and smelled strongly of dark coffee. She was completely tangled in the thick grey sheets. Her entire body ached from the sheer stress of the night before, but her mind felt incredibly sharp. She sat up slowly, pulling the sheets up to her chest. Junwoo was already awake. He was standing in front of the full-length mirror, buttoning a crisp black dress shirt. He was not wearing a tie today. He looked dark, massive, and completely ready for violence. He watched her in the mirror as she sat up. "How is your mother?" he asked, his voice a deep, quiet rumble in the large room. "She is still sleeping," Rachel said, rubbing her tired eyes. "The doctor said she will probably sleep until noon. The guards are still outside her door." "They will not leave her side," Junwoo promised, turning around to face her. He walked over to the bed and held out a steaming cup of black coffee. Rachel took it, letting the heat warm her cold fingers. She looked up at him. The man who had pretended to be a silent ghost for 15 years was entirely gone. His shoulders were completely pulled back. The dangerous, hyper-aware light in his dark eyes was burning bright. He was not hiding anymore. "Drink your coffee and get dressed," Junwoo ordered softly. "My stylists left a black suit for you in the closet. We leave for the office in 20 minutes. "The board of directors called an emergency meeting at 9 o'clock, Rachel said, remembering Madam CEO's angry threat from yesterday. "They are going to try to push the vote through using the fake papers I gave them." Junwoo let out a dark, low laugh. "Let them gather in the room. I want all of them sitting at the same table when I walk through the door. I want to see exactly who shits their pants first." Rachel took a long sip of the bitter coffee. She felt a hard, tight knot of excitement form in her stomach. In her past life, she had walked into that boardroom completely alone, terrified and totally powerless as her uncle and Madam CEO tore her life apart. Today, she was walking and holding the leash of the most dangerous man in the city. She got out of bed and walked into the massive bathroom. She took a fast, hot shower, washing the smell of the warehouse out of her hair. When she stepped into the closet, she found the black suit Junwoo had mentioned. It was perfectly tailored, sleek, and incredibly intimidating. She put it on, slipping her aching feet into a pair of black leather boots instead of high heels. She pulled her dark hair back into a tight, severe ponytail. She walked back into the bedroom. Junwoo was slipping his black metal gun into his shoulder holster. He put his dark suit jacket on over it, completely hiding the weapon. He looked at her, his eyes dragging slowly up and down her body. "You look like a killer, wife." "I am learning from the best," she replied smoothly. They took the private elevator down to the garage. Jin was waiting with the Maybach, but today was entirely different. There were 4 massive black SUVs waiting with them. A dozen men in sharp suits and dark sunglasses were standing around the cars. They were the shadow unit, the men who had cleared the warehouse last night. "We ride heavy today, boss," Jin said, opening the back door of the Maybach. Junwoo nodded and guided Rachel into the back seat. The massive convoy of black cars rolled out of the underground garage and hit the wet Seattle streets. The rain was finally starting to slow down, turning into a cold, ugly mist. The drive to the CEO Group headquarters felt incredibly fast. Rachel's heart hammered against her ribs, but Junwoo sat completely still next to her, radiating absolute calm. He was completely in his element. The convoy pulled up to the front doors of the massive glass building. Pedestrians actually stopped and stared as the heavily armed security team piled out of the SUVs. Jin opened the door for Junwoo, who stepped out onto the wet pavement. He reached his hand back and helped Rachel out. Junwoo did not slump his shoulders. He did not drop his chin. He stood perfectly straight, towering over everyone around him. He wrapped his thick fingers entirely around Rachel's hand, holding it in a tight, possessive grip. They walked through the front doors. The massive lobby was filled with employees holding coffee cups and briefcases. The exact second Junwoo walked in, the entire room went completely, dead silent. People stopped right in their tracks. A woman actually dropped her phone on the marble floor. They were entirely used to seeing their CEO pushed through the lobby in a wheelchair or guided slowly by nurses with a blank, drooling stare on his face. Seeing him walking with heavy, confident steps, wearing a sharp suit and staring straight ahead with lethal focus, completely broke their brains. Junwoo ignored all of them. He led Rachel straight to the private executive elevators. The security team formed a tight wall around them. The heavy steel doors slid shut, cutting off the shocked whispers of the lobby. 50th floor, Junwoo told Jin. The elevator shot upward. Rachel squeezed Junwoo's hand. He squeezed back gently, a silent reminder that she was completely safe. On the 50th floor, the boardroom was already packed. Madame Seo sat at the far end of the long mahogany table, wearing a sharp white suit. Her face was set in a cold, hard mask. Tae-jin sat directly to her right, aggressively tapping a gold pen against a stack of legal documents. Mr. Song, the sweaty finance director, sat halfway down the table. He looked absolutely miserable, staring at his own hands like he wanted to die. 20 other board members filled the rest of the expensive leather chairs. "We are not waiting for the nurse to bring him up," Madame Seo announced loudly to the room. "The medical reports are completely clear. Seo Junwoo is permanently brain dead. We have the legal right to vote him out right now to protect the stock price." "I second the motion," Tae-jin said quickly, a nasty smile spreading across his thin face. "Let's get the broken freak out of our company and get back to making real money." A few of the board members nodded in agreement. They all raised their hands to vote. The heavy double doors of the boardroom suddenly clicked. Everyone turned to look, expecting to see Jin slowly pushing Junwoo into the room. The doors swung wide open, slamming loudly against the walls. Junwoo walked into the room. His footsteps were heavy and completely deliberate on the hardwood floor. Rachel walked right beside him, her head held high. Jin and 4 massive security guards stepped into the room right behind them, spreading out along the back wall and completely blocking the exit. The boardroom went so quiet, it felt like the oxygen had been sucked entirely out of the room. Tae-jin's gold pen slipped out of his fingers and hit the table with a sharp clink. His mouth fell open in total shock. Madame Seo completely froze in her chair, her cold blue eyes widening to the size of coins. Mr. Song, who already knew the truth, just squeezed his eyes shut and started sweating twice as hard. Junwoo did not say a word. He walked slowly down the entire length of the table. The board members completely shrank back into their chairs as he passed them. The sheer, overwhelming dominance rolling off his massive frame was terrifying. He reached the head of the table. He pulled out a leather chair and looked down at Rachel. "Sit, wife." Rachel sat down smoothly, crossing her legs and folding her hands on the table. She looked directly at Madame Seo, offering the older woman a very cold, very dark smile. Junwoo turned his attention to the man sitting in the main CEO chair. "You are sitting in my chair, Tae-jin," Junwoo said. His deep, rough voice echoed loudly against the glass walls. It was the first time anyone in that room had heard him speak in 15 years. Tae-jin completely panicked. He scrambled backward, his shoes slipping on the floor as he practically threw himself out of the expensive leather seat. He bumped into the wall, breathing heavily, staring at Junwoo like he was looking at an actual ghost. "You," Tae-jin stammered, his face turning a sickly shade of grey. "You can talk." "I can do a lot of things," Junwoo replied flatly. He sat down slowly in the massive chair at the head of the table. He leaned back, resting his elbows on the armrests, and looked down the long table at the terrified faces of his enemies. "I heard you were taking a vote," Junwoo said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, low rumble. "Please, continue. I want to see exactly who in this room wants to steal my company." No one moved, no one even breathed. Madame Seo was the first to recover. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles turning completely white. She was furious, but she was also incredibly smart. She realized instantly that the entire 15-year act had been a massive trap, and she had walked right into it. "This is a trick," Madame Seo hissed, pointing a shaking finger at him. "You faked a medical condition for a decade. That is fraud. The board can still remove you for deceiving the shareholders." "I did not fake anything," Junwoo said smoothly, completely unbothered by her yelling. He snapped his fingers. Jin stepped forward and dropped a thick black folder right in front of Madame Seo. Those are the real medical records, Junwoo explained, his dark eyes locking onto his stepmother. Signed by 3 independent military doctors, they state that my psychological mutism was completely real, brought on by severe childhood trauma, but they also state that I made a full, spontaneous recovery 6 months ago. He leaned forward, placing his large hands flat on the mahogany table. If you try to sue me for fraud, I will sue you for attempting to use forged, stolen medical documents to execute an illegal corporate coup. I have the security footage of your assistant paying the doctor to forge the fake papers you are holding right now. Madame Seo looked down at the black folder. She realized she was completely boxed in. He had planned for every single move. And as for you, Tae-jin, Junwoo said, turning his cold stare to his stepbrother, who was still pressed against the wall. If you ever insult my wife in public again, I will not fire you. I will simply have Jin throw you out of this window. Tae-jin swallowed hard, his eyes darting quickly to the massive glass window behind him. He nodded quickly, entirely too scared to speak. Rachel watched the entire exchange with complete awe. Junwoo was dismantling their entire power structure without raising his voice once. He was a master at psychological warfare. Suddenly, the heavy boardroom doors flew open again. Marcus burst into the room. He was sweating heavily, his face bright red from running up the hallway. He was completely out of breath. He did not look at the head of the table. He just looked at Tae-jin and Madame Seo. Did you vote? Marcus yelled, his loud, ugly voice breaking the tense silence. Did you get the freak out? We have to sign the shares over right now. The entire boardroom stared at Marcus like he was an absolute lunatic. Rachel felt a deep, vicious satisfaction rise in her chest. She slowly stood up from her chair. Hello, Uncle Marcus, Rachel said clearly. Marcus snapped his head toward her voice. He saw Rachel standing there, completely unharmed, wearing an expensive suit. And then his eyes shifted to the massive, dark-haired man sitting right next to her in the CEO's chair. Marcus stopped breathing. His mouth hung open, the color completely drained out of his fat face. He realized the K-Kangpi boss had been telling the absolute truth. Junwoo slowly stood up. He buttoned his suit jacket, his dark eyes fixing entirely on Marcus. He looked like a predator that had finally cornered a very fat, very stupid pig. Marcus, Junwoo said softly, walking slowly around the edge of the table. I have been waiting for you. Marcus could not move. His feet felt like they were glued to the expensive hardwood floor. He stared at the massive, dark-haired man standing at the head of the boardroom table. Seo Junwoo was not in a wheelchair. He was not drooling. He was wearing a custom black suit, and his eyes were completely dead and focused, like a shark looking at a bleeding fish. You, Marcus choked out, his throat was completely dry. You are speaking. I am, Junwoo said smoothly. He took a slow step toward Marcus. And I am very interested to hear what you have to say, Marcus. You just ran into my boardroom yelling about a vote. You wanted my shares signed over. Why? Marcus started shaking. He looked around the room. He looked at Madame Seo, who was glaring at him with pure hatred. He looked at Tae-jin, who was pressing himself flat against the glass wall. No one was going to help him. I was just worried, Marcus lied, his voice cracking loudly. He tried to force a fake, sick smile onto his fat face. The news broke this morning about your medical records. I was worried about the company. I came to help my niece. Junwoo let out a dark, booming laugh that made the entire room flinch. You came to help. Before we watch Junwoo completely destroy this man, please leave a like on this video if you are loving this boardroom revenge scene. It really helps the algorithm push more dark romance stories to you. I have to know, what do you think Junwoo should do to Marcus? Should he hand him over to the police, or should he let the K-Kangpi handle him on the streets? Let me know in the comments, and tell me if you have ever had the pleasure of watching a toxic person finally get what they deserve. If you are hooked on Rachel and Junwoo's story, hit that subscribe button. Junwoo stopped laughing. His face turned entirely cold. He reached inside his dark suit jacket. Marcus gasped and took a huge step back, throwing his hands up to cover his face, thinking Junwoo was going to pull out a gun right in front of the board of directors. Instead, Junwoo pulled out a small, black audio recorder. He pressed a button and tossed it onto the polished mahogany table. It slid across the wood and stopped right in front of Marcus. The loud, clear audio of the K-Kangpi leader's voice filled the quiet boardroom. Marcus hired us, he paid us 100 grand. It was just a job. Please man, it was just a job. The recording clicked off. The silence in the room was heavier than a brick wall. Marcus dropped his hands. His face turned the color of dirty snow. He was sweating so much that his thin hair was stuck flat to his forehead. He looked at the black recorder, and then he looked up at Junwoo's absolute killer stare. "That is a lie," Marcus whispered, taking another step backward toward the heavy double doors. "That is a complete fake. I don't know any street gangs. I am a legitimate businessman." Rachel stood up from her leather chair. She walked around the table until she was standing right next to her husband. She looked at her uncle. For her entire life, this man had controlled her. He had starved her, hit her, and locked her sick mother in a filthy room. He was the monster under her bed. But right now, standing next to Junwoo, Rachel realized Marcus was not a monster. He was just a pathetic, greedy little man who had finally run out of luck. "It is not a fake, Uncle Marcus," Rachel said, her voice ringing out completely clear and hard. "They broke into the care facility last night. They tied my mother to a chair in a warehouse by the docks. They held a gun to her head and told me they would cut her throat if I did not sign Junwoo's shares over to them." A loud gasp rippled through the board members sitting at the table. Even Madame CEO looked slightly shocked by the pure, dirty violence of the street gangs. Marcus pointed a shaking, fat finger at Rachel. "You shut your mouth. You ungrateful little bitch. I gave you a roof over your head. I fed you. You are supposed to be on my side." "I am on my own side," Rachel shot back, not flinching at all. "And my mother is safe. She is sleeping in my penthouse right now, surrounded by armed guards. Your street dogs are entirely dead, Marcus. My husband killed them." Marcus's eyes bulged completely out of his head. He looked at Junwoo. The reality of the situation finally crashed down on him. Junwoo had not just survived the attack, he had slaughtered the Kangpi. "You are crazy," Marcus yelled, spit flying from his lips. He spun around and grabbed the heavy brass handle of the boardroom door. "I am leaving. You are all fucking crazy." He yanked the door open to run. Jin was standing right on the other side. The tall security guard with the scarred neck did not move an inch. He just reached out with one massive hand and shoved Marcus hard right in the center of his chest. Marcus flew backward, his heavy boots slipping on the wood. He crashed to the floor, landing hard on his back. The wind was completely knocked out of him. He laid there, wheezing and groaning in pain. Jin stepped fully into the room. Two men in dark blue police uniforms walked in right behind him. "Mr. Marcus CEO," one of the police officers said, pulling a pair of heavy silver handcuffs off his belt. "We have a warrant for your arrest. The charges are conspiracy to commit murder, kidnapping, and corporate fraud." "No," Marcus screamed, rolling onto his stomach and trying to crawl away. "I didn't do it. She is lying. They are setting me up." The two officers grabbed Marcus by his arms and hauled his heavy body off the floor. They slammed him face first into the glass wall of the boardroom. Marcus yelled in pain as the cold glass hit his nose. The officer quickly locked the tight steel cuffs around his thick wrists. "You have the right to remain silent," the officer read the rights, completely ignoring Marcus's screaming. Rachel watched them drag her uncle out of the room. He kicked and cursed the entire way down the hallway. When the heavy doors finally clicked shut, the sound of his screaming was completely gone. The nightmare was actually over. The man who had ruined her past life and tortured her in this one was going to spend the rest of his life rotting in a tiny concrete cell. Junwoo turned slowly away from the door. He looked back at the long table of frozen, terrified board members. "Now," Junwoo said, his deep voice slicing through the quiet room, "let's talk about the future of this company." He walked back to his massive leather chair and sat down. He leaned back and steepled his thick fingers together. Rachel walked back and sat in the chair right next to him. "Mr. Song," Junwoo called out. The heavy-set finance director jumped in his seat. He was sweating so badly his white shirt was completely soaked. "Yes, Mr. CEO, yes, sir." "You are keeping your job," Junwoo said flatly. "But your department is going to undergo a complete, entirely brutal financial audit starting in exactly 10 minutes. Every single dollar you have moved in the last 4 years will be tracked. If I find one penny out of place, I will hand those photos of your second family directly to your father-in-law. Do you understand me?" "Yes, sir," Song cried out, nodding his head so fast it looked painful. "Thank you, sir. I will be perfect. The audit will be perfect." Junwoo shifted his dark eyes to his stepbrother. Taejin was still standing pressed against the wall, looking completely sick. "Taejin," Junwoo said, "you are officially fired. You will clear out your office by noon. You will hand over your corporate credit cards and your company car keys to Jin on your way out the door. Jin's face turned bright red. He looked at his mother for help, but Madame Seo just stared straight ahead, her jaw locked tight. You can't do that, Jin yelled, trying to find some courage. I own 10% of this company. I am the vice president. You cannot just fire me without a board vote. Junwoo picked up the black folder of his real medical records from the table. I can do whatever the hell I want, Jin, because if you do not walk out of this building quietly right now, I will play the security tape for the police showing you and your mother paying Dr. Park to forge my records. You will share a prison cell with Marcus. Make your choice. Jin opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He knew he was completely beaten. He looked at Rachel with pure hatred, then looked at the floor. He pushed himself off the wall and practically ran out of the boardroom without looking back. Finally, Junwoo looked at Madame Seo. The older woman sat perfectly straight in her white suit. She had lost her son, she had lost her pawn, and she had completely lost her power, but she still refused to look scared. You played a very long, very sick game, Junwoo, Madame Seo said coldly. But I am still a majority shareholder. I am still your father's widow. You cannot fire me. I don't need to fire you, Junwoo said softly. A dark, vicious smile touched the corners of his mouth. I am just going to bury you. Your voting rights are completely suspended pending a federal investigation into your medical fraud. You are no longer allowed in this building. You are no longer allowed to speak for the Seo Group. You will take your money, you will go back to your expensive castle on the cliff, and you will stay entirely out of my way. Madame Seo stood up. She smoothed down the front of her expensive silk skirt. She did not yell, she did not beg. She just stared at Junwoo with absolute cold venom. You are exactly like your father, she sneered. A completely violent, ruthless thug wearing a rich man's suit. You will ruin this family. The family was already ruined, Junwoo replied without blinking. I am just taking out the trash. Madame Seo turned on her heel and walked out of the room. Her expensive high heels clicked sharply on the wood floor until she was gone. Junwoo looked at the 20 remaining board members. They were all staring at him in complete, absolute terror. This meeting is over, Junwoo announced, his voice dropping to a low, heavy command. Get back to work. The board members practically tripped over each other trying to get out of the room. They grabbed their briefcases and rushed through the double doors, desperate to get away from the massive, wide-awake predator sitting at the head of the table. Within 60 seconds, the massive boardroom was completely empty. Rachel let out a long, shuddering breath. She slumped back into her leather chair. Her entire body felt light. It was over. The nightmare that had haunted her for 2 lifetimes was completely ripped out by the roots. Marcus was in handcuffs. The plane trap was no longer needed because the rat was under total control. Junwoo was safe. Hey, a rough, gentle voice said right next to her. Rachel turned her head. Junwoo was watching her. The violent, scary CEO was completely gone. He was just looking at her, his dark eyes soft and entirely focused on her face. You okay? He asked quietly. Rachel nodded. A small, real smile slowly spread across her face. I am. For the first time in a really long time, I am actually okay. Junwoo reached out and grabbed her hand. He pulled her up out of her chair. He wrapped his arms around her waist and pulled her flush against his chest. He did not care that they were standing in a glass room where the whole city could see them. He just held her tight. We did it, Rachel whispered into his dark suit. You did it, Junwoo corrected her, kissing the top of her head. You came back and you saved my life. You tore your own uncle apart to protect me. You are the most terrifying, beautiful thing I have ever seen. Rachel laughed. It was a real, bright sound that filled the quiet room. She looked up at him. So, what happens now? The fake marriage contract says I am supposed to leave after the threat is gone. Junwoo's face turned incredibly serious. His grip on her waist tightened instantly, completely locking her against his body. Fuck the contract, he growled softly, leaning down so his mouth was an inch from hers. You are my wife, you are my partner, you are not going anywhere, Rachel. You are staying right here with me for the rest of our lives. Do you understand? Rachel looked into his dark, possessive eyes. She thought about the cold, lonely alley where she had died in her past life. She thought about the endless fear. And then she looked at the man who had burned down the entire city just to keep her safe. She reached up and wrapped her arms around his neck. I understand, she smiled. Junwoo crashed his lips against hers, kissing her deep and hard. It was a promise. It was an absolute victory. They had fought fate, they had fought their own families, and they had completely won. They were going to rule the city together, and God help anyone who ever tried to get in their way again.